Welcome back, my fellow viewers. Tonight, we're diving deep into the chilling tale of a quiet Japanese village where family ties turned deadly and something far darker took root. On the surface, the village named Kawakami seems like a picturesque place where nothing ever happens. But if that was all there was to it, there would be no story in this video. This chilling recount of events on that particular night was brought in no small thanks for yours truly for probing with my long internet connection through the deep and cavernous bowels of Ni-chan, otherwise known as 2chan, a Japanese version of 4chan, a Japanese anonymous message board. Thus, it's a coin toss whether or not what you are about to hear is true or falsehood. What do you get when you mix daddy issues, a porch drinking session gone wrong, and a hefty dose of paranormal payback? A recipe for disaster, of course. Ryota Matsukawa didn't just ruin family dinner. He turned into a rural ghost story that still keeps the neighbors up at night. Moral of the story? Maybe stick to tea on the porch instead of cheap sake, unless you're in the mood to become an urban legend. This happened a couple of years ago in early June, in a small, unassuming village in Japan. I live in a quiet corner of Kawakami City, Nagano Prefecture, where nothing much happens. But something did happen. It was the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, replaying every detail in your mind, wondering how it could have gone so wrong. Kawakami is the kind of village where you can hear the wind rustling through the pine trees, where the air smells like wet earth and fresh leaves, and the biggest excitement is a festival at a local Shinto shrine. Life is slow and predictable here, and people like it that way. You'd never expect anything truly sinister to happen in a place like this, but then monsters don't always announce themselves with snarls and roars. Sometimes they're just ordinary people living quiet lives until something breaks inside them. As one local Miko, Rena Sakaguchi, who is a shrine maiden in her early 20s, bless her heart, attending to one of several local Shinto shrines, numerous times said to me when I talked to her at work at the local izakaya. The local kami spoke to me and said, "Do not be afraid of what comes after death, because hell is empty. Its open aging wooden doors are flapping in the wind, and all the evil ones are walking here among us." The Matsukawa family had lived in our village for generations. Their house was a weathered, two-story Japanese-style building with peeling paint and aging roof, nestled at the end of a winding road, surrounded by overgrown bushes and shrubbery of all kinds. It was one of those houses that looked tired and abandoned, even though it was still very much lived in. Kiyoshi Matsukawa, the father, had always been a friendly face in the community. He worked hard, kept to himself mostly, but was quick to offer a smile or lend a helping hand. Ryota, his son, was different, brooding, quiet, with an edge to him that made people a little uneasy when he was around, even before things went wrong. The night it happened was one of those sticky June evenings where the air clings to your skin and everything feels just a bit off. I remember hearing them that night. Everyone did. Kiyoshi and Ryota were sitting on the front porch of their house, drinking like they often did. It was a ritual for them, father and son, bonding over a cheap sake bought from the local konbini, either Family Mart or Lawson's probably, with crickets chirping in the background. But that night there was something different in the air, something heavy, like the calm before a storm. The argument started off small, just murmured words laced with irritation. No one thought much of it. We're used to hearing raised noises in this town, but then the shouting got louder. I couldn't make heads or tails out of the words from my house, but it wasn't long before everyone on the street was drawn to their windows, peering through the curtains and blinds. I saw Mrs. Tanaka step out onto her porch, her face pale, wringing her hands in anxiety. The shouting was followed by a loud crash, the sound of something breaking, then silence, like the whole world was holding its breath. I crept out onto my own porch, unable to stay inside any longer, and that's when I saw it. Ryota was standing over his father, who was slumped on the ground by the edge of the porch. There was blood on Kiyoshi's face, a dark smear under the pale moonlight. He was still conscious, trying to push himself up, but Ryota shoved him back down with a force that didn't seem human. And then, as if possessed by some malevolent spirit, Ryota dropped to his knees, wrapped his hands around his father's throat, and began to squeeze. Miss Tanaka screamed. She ran forward, shouting at him to stop, but Ryota didn't even flinch. He just glared at her with eyes that were no longer his own, cold, empty, as if all the warmth had drained out of him. Ryota had finally become an Onryo, the evil, malevolent spirit. "I don't care if I go to prison," he hissed through gritted teeth. "I'm ending this tonight." His voice was low and guttural, almost like it came from something deep within him, like something dark had taken root in his soul and was speaking through him. By the time the police arrived, Kiyoshi was already gone. Ryota was just sitting there on the porch steps, staring out into the night as if nothing had happened. He called the police himself, calmly told them his father was dead, then he called his sister to tell her the same. He didn't even try to run. When they took him away in handcuffs, he didn't fight, didn't say a word. It was like whatever had possessed him had burned itself out, leaving behind an empty shell. The police later found out that Ryota had a blood alcohol level of 2.69, which is dangerously high. He claimed in court that he blacked out and didn't know what he was doing, that it was all a blur, but the courts didn't buy it. He called the police himself right after it happened, and he even called his sister to tell her he'd killed her father. These aren't the actions of someone completely out of control. He knew, and he was aware enough to understand what he had done. There is something else, though. People in the neighborhood started talking after the incident. There had been strange things going on in the Matsukawa house in the weeks leading up to the murder. People heard loud arguments late at night, shouting that seemed to come out of nowhere, a weird chanting, but whenever someone asked about it, Kiyoshi would just brush it off, saying everything was fine. Ryota was seen acting oddly too, talking to himself, pacing up and down the street at all hours, staring at nothing. Some of us wondered if there was more going on in that house than we realized. Maybe it wasn't just alcohol that pushed Ryota over the edge. In the end, Ryota was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He had no prior criminal record, just a few minor run-ins with the law. Nothing violent, more like traffic tickets. But the court decided that what he did was deliberate. They said that he was a menace to society, especially considering he killed someone close to him, someone who loved him despite everything. That was the most chilling part, really. If you can do that to your own father, what else are you capable of? I still think about it sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet and I am laying in my bed. I think about Mrs. Tanaka standing there, helpless, watching a man kill his own father. I think about Ryota's eyes, the way she described them, like empty, as if all the humanity had drained out, replaced by something cold and pitiless. In the days that followed, people tried to make sense of it. Ryota had never been violent before. Sure, he had issues, but who hasn't? He'd been in trouble a few times, minor stuff, but nothing like this. But everyone said he and his father got along fine. Kiyoshi had been nothing but supportive to his son, even when Ryota went off the rails as a teenager, so why? Why would he do something so horrific? And then there were the sightings. People started saying they saw Kiyoshi's ghost wandering the street in front of his house. A few folks claimed they saw him sitting off on the porch, just like he used to, except now he looked wrong. His face was twisted, as if frozen in the last moment of his death, eyes bulging, mouth open in a silent scream. One night, I saw something myself. I was walking home late from work, and as I passed the Matsukawa house, I felt this chill crawl up my spine. When I turned to look, I could have sworn I saw Kiyoshi's figure standing there in the shadows. But it wasn't just the sight that froze me, it was the smell. The sickly sweet stench of rotting flesh hanging in the air. Some nights you can still hear the sounds of angry voices drifting through the streets, even though no one was there. The neighbors say it's the echo of that night, replaying itself over and over, trapped in the loop. But I think it's more than that. I think Kiyoshi's spirit is still there, unable to rest, consumed by the betrayal and horror of what his own son did to him. They say Ryota was haunted too, even before the trial. His sister visited him in the detention center, and she said he wasn't the same. He kept talking about shadows in his cell, things whispering to him in the dark, telling him that he'd never be free, that even when his time was up, he'd still be paying for what he'd done. He claimed to see his father every night, standing at the foot of his bed, watching him with those same dead eyes. The house still stands, actually, although now it's empty, slowly rotting away. No one dares go near it. Even the weeds grow in twisted, unnatural patterns around the property, as if even nature is avoiding that place. We all keep our distance. Whatever happened that night didn't end when Kiyoshi took his last breath. Something lingered, something dark and malevolent, feeding on the tragedy, and it is still there, waiting. So if you ever find yourself in Kawakami village, Nagano prefecture, walking down our quiet streets, and you feel the air grow cold for no reason, or catch a faint scent of decay on the wind, just keep on walking. Don't look back. And whatever you do not stop by the old Matsukawa house. Some things are better left forgotten. This happened during my final year of high school, when I was still living with my parents in Shimokitazawa, a district of Tokyo. One particularly dark and stormy night in Shimokitazawa, while I was laying in bed, probably in a state somewhere between half awake and half asleep, I started feeling strange. My head was turned to the right side, facing away from the door. Suddenly, an inexplicable feeling of unease pulled me from my slumber. Unlike the gradual awakening of a typical morning, my eyes snapped open, fully alert. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized that the morning was still far away. It was still night time. After blinking a couple of times, in my dazed and confused state, I suddenly saw what I could only describe as an apparition hovering at the foot of my bed. It was not a vague shadow or a trick of the light, but a distinct figure, translucent yet unmistakable. It was a young man, similar to the boy from the Grudge movie, you know, with gaunt features and eyes devoid of emotion. Perhaps this is what terrified me the most. I had no idea what he was going to do next. Is he sad, happy or angry, or in between? It was the fear of the unknown that terrified me the most. He looked directly at me with his meaningless gaze. Frozen in terror, I could only stare back. The room seemed to grow colder, and the air felt heavy with a suffocating presence. The figure began to move, gliding silently around the bed, coming closer with each passing second. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear almost paralyzing me. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice seemed trapped within me. The apparition reached the side of my bed, leaning in closer until his face was mere inches from me. I could see every detail, the hollow cheeks, the dark circles under his eyes, the slight shimmer of his ghostly form. His breath, cold and stale, brushed against my skin as he whispered, voice full of emotion, but his face remaining expressionless. Help me. The words sent a shiver down my spine. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. Was this real? A nightmare? My instincts took over, and I turned away, pulling the blanket over my head like a child seeking protection from the monster in the closet. I lay there shaking, listening to the silence that followed. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I flinched, unable to move, my body locked in place. The touch was icy, seeping through the fabric of my pajamas, and I could feel the pressure increasing. as if the apparition was trying to pull me back. Then I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It started softly, but grew louder, echoing through the room. I realized that whatever it was, it is no longer touching my shoulder, but instead, the thing is making noise somewhere further away in my room. Summoning every ounce of my remaining courage, I peeked out from under the blanket. The apparition was now by the window, tapping its fingers against the glass in a slow, deliberate manner. It turned to look at me, his eyes remaining expressionless. "Help me," he said with a shuddering voice. My alarm clock caught my eye. It was 1:03 a.m. I had to do something. Summoning the remnants of my bravery, I decided to confront whatever was happening. I sat up, suddenly shaking but very determined, and asked, "What? What do you want?" The apparition looked at me for a moment. Then it simply opened its mouth to speak and asked, "Have I died?" I blinked in confusion, and the next moment I knew, suddenly, the apparition vanished, leaving me alone in my cold, dark room. I was breathless, my heart pounding. I glanced at the clock again. It was 1:05 a.m. Only 2 minutes have passed, yet it felt like an eternity. "Kya!" I started screaming. Naturally, my mom came to my room, terrified of my screams. She comforted and reassured me that everything was all right. According to her, I had experienced something along the lines of vivid nightmare and/or sleep paralysis. Once I calmed down, my mom left my room and returned to her own bedroom to continue sleeping. I, however, felt too restless to just fall back asleep after what just happened. Thus, I turned on the light, flooding my room with a warm, reassuring orange glow. The cold sensation that lingered in my room quickly dissipated with the orange warm light, but my fear still lingered. I needed some more reassurance if I was to go back to sleep tonight without freaking myself out again. So I went out to get my family dog, Max. As soon as he entered my room, he began to growl, his face fixed on the corner of the ceiling. My blood ran cold. It was as if the presence was still there, watching and waiting. And my dog, Max, could sense it. It's as if my dog was trying to protect me or chase away whatever still lingered inside my room. I immediately felt so secure and protected. #feeling blessed. Like, oh my god. Desperate for some kind of closure, I approached the corner. My voice now seems much more stern and deliberate as I shout, "Why don't you just let me be? Seriously, like, oh my god. I don't know anything about you or how to help you, nor do I really care. Go and annoy someone somewhere else. Shoo!" For a moment there, I thought I saw a reflection of this so-called apparition in my nearby mirror, looking at me with a pepe expression, a single tear rolling down his cheek, and then, just as sudden, it disappeared. This both freaked me out and confused me at the same time. Then the coldness lifted, and my dog Max stopped growling. I stayed up for the rest of the night, unable to sleep. The apparition's image and his Pepe face expression still etched into my mind. The next day, I learned something that gave me a pause. My mother told me about a previous family who lived there before we moved over. The mother in that family had a son who was very much into researching internet memes during his free time, but the son unfortunately died at a relatively early age. Apparently the young man decided to end his journey prematurely sometime before finishing high school. Mom didn't have the opportunity to pry more, as the previous owners of our place were not the most conversation type. Not to mention, the previous owners of our house mentioned this only briefly and only after the money was paid, before immediately leaving the premises. We do not know exactly where the previous owners of our place had moved, so unfortunately it is impossible for us to contact and ask them for more information. Could it be that the ghost had visited me seeking some help or closure, or was it all just for the lulz? Considering that this young man at the time was very much into researching internet memes at the time, was I literally trolled by an undead ghost just for them keks? So the ghost literally checked and kecked from me, sleeping in what previously was his own room? I'll never know for sure, but the experience left an indelible mark on me. Years have passed, and I still sleep in the same room, and I'm still living with my parents in Shimokitazawa. Nothing like that has ever happened again, but every now and then I do feel a cold breeze or hear a faint tapping at the window. It's a reminder of that night, and of this strange apparition that visited me.